This is a fascinating question. And from my own perspective, it's probably the most important question of all eight. You know? And in the book that I'd written, Disordered Minds, that book was really written around for me, the recognition that the tyrants of the 20th century, Mao and Stalin and Hitler and so forth, had emerged out of the fissures, the failures of capitalism in the early 20th century. The inequalities, the vast inequalities that were existent at that time. Out of that, the ideological struggle between capitalism and communism, which at root, it's interesting, at root, they were both aimed at the same thing. They were both aimed at material well-being, rather than a larger framing of, maybe there were aspects of it, but a larger framing of gender equality and human flourishing beyond material, beyond material well-being and so forth. Neither of them could be described as spiritual movements in terms of a movement of human consciousness beyond a focus on material. And by that spiritualism, I don't mean that's not necessarily something that's supernatural or something that's, by spiritual, I mean something that's much more about how we want to live our lives. What is the impulse within ourselves for our own personal and societal development. And as I said, words like love come into that conversation, love and development and empathy and so forth. So how do we build a society that is based on fundamental human values that we see from our moment of birth? So neither capitalism nor communism were based on an ideology that went much beyond material growth. So when I say what role does economics play in society, I think it has been shown to play an almost a foundational role in shaping society, in shaping our view of ourselves, and in enabling or containing the pathologies within society. And by pathology, I mean greed and violence. So capitalism, by enabling enormous inequalities, can empower individuals and movements that are, that resort to violence, that resort to greed and so forth. And we've seen that in the 20th century. So I think our framing of economics, the relationship between economics and capitalism and other social systems such as democracy and so forth, is absolutely fundamental to not only to our material well-being, but to our peace and security.
Economics, the kind of positive economics, has become like a detached, amoral science, if you want to use that word. And I think many economists revel in that status, that it's not their job to bring in ethical considerations. It's purely to look at market outcomes and the role of the state and the interaction of the two, and to produce objective analytical advice based on that, and not sort of confuse it with these ethical dimensions and issues. And do you think that economics can integrate ethics, or can it reform to have a more holistic approach to thinking about people and not just outcomes of markets and economic performance?
I think it's a fundamental mischaracterization to say that economics is currently amoral. I mean, the economic system, the framing of the system, absolutely is imbued with value, is imbued with values.
Yeah.
And those values are that certain things are externalities, certain things are not counted, certain things are valued over other things. So looking after other people's wealth is valued more highly than being a nurse or being a teacher, and as reflected in wages. So it's a fundamental, and I think it was, in one sense, it was a tactic for many on neoliberalism to paint it as an amoral system with no values, as a system that ran by itself. And this goes back again to the economic science, or almost like rules of nature. It's nonsense.
And we hear a lot also, developing this idea a bit further, the cult of evidence-based policymaking is actually gaining ground, gaining traction. And it's kind of dangerous to go in this direction, because evidence, again, it's like your discussion of, what is science, what is engineering, but what is evidence is really important, because I get the impression that if we only look at data, past data, and that is what we think of as evidence, then it's almost like the belief is that we know everything there is to know. And when thinking about the future, we just have to base it on extrapolation based on what's already happened. But the nature of the systems that we're looking at are not like this. And so evidence-based policy, everybody agrees with that term and say, yeah, of course we need evidence-based policy, but it can actually restrict the field of view in a way that's quite dangerous.
Absolutely. And I think that's the way I think of that is the most important thing is your framing. And then the evidence that's permissible within that framing, or the evidence that you then think is essential within that framing. So this is very important at the moment, for example, in terms of system transitions. So the transition towards lower carbon energy system, or for climate change, or transitions in energy, or whatever, or transport and so on, and agriculture. There was a comment at a meeting I was at recently where the comment was made about evaluation, and current methods of evaluation, which of course is gathering the data within a framing, which is a static system, for maximizing the efficiency of that system. But that method of evaluation and then assessing projects within that framing will actually be detrimental to progress. It'll stop the necessary progress we absolutely have to make. Because the framing will be you haven't increased productivity, you haven't got the number of whatever it is. Whereas what you really need in an evaluation of system transition is the learnings that you're having. Are you proceeding towards the goal? You don't know what the path is going to be, so therefore you can't put the data in place in many cases to measure that. So as I say, that's an example for me about evidence-based. Of course you want evidence-based, but as you say, what counts as evidence absolutely depends on the framing within which you assess that.